Hey everyone, a big welcome to the Forge Ahead show, hosted by me, Nick Elston, inspirational speaker, creator of unique mental health engagement strategies, a transformational speaking coach, and a mentor to have in your corner. The Forge Ahead show brings you the storytellers, the influencers, the people who have gone from adversity to excitement, forging something better, something beautiful, something powerful. So stay tuned, dive in, and be inspired by today's very special guest. Hey everyone, and a big welcome back to the Forge Ahead show, season 2, episode 15. God, time's flying by, coming thick and fast every week, and I've got another amazing guest bringing my good friend, Miss Martha Lawton.
Hello, nice to see you.
Hi.
Hey.
Really excited about this one because you have, like, you know when people say they have a book in them, then you've probably got a library.
Maybe. I'm
So
such a lazy author, though.
Yeah. So give us a kind of a, I don't know, like a game show overview. Who are you from? What do you do? That kind of thing.
Okay. So who am I from?
Who am I from? That's a whole different question.
That is a different question. Yes.
We could go with parentage if you want. That could get awkward for some, but
Yeah. No, I don't think it is. I'm pretty clearly the product of who they say I am from.
And we'll come on to that as well.
Yeah. So who am I now? I'm a financial educator, certified money coach, not of the woo-woo manifesting type, of the, hey, let's talk about whether the way you're acting and the things that you believe are holding you back in terms of reaching your financial goals, and how we can change how you're framing things, and find some ways to kind of build better habits and rearrange your life a little bit so that you are happier in your relationship with money and achieving more. That stuff I do. I do a podcast on the topic of the emotional side of money, which is called Squanderlust.
What a name. It's an amazing name for a podcast.
Thank you so much. It's really about, there are so many podcasts that are like, be rich tomorrow, or like, make amazing money today. Like, they're very, very super aspirational, and they're all about like achieving sort of perfect financial bliss by just extreme willpower. And
so maybe the same approach that Links takes
frugality.
With their advertising, or Viagra or something like that. Those kind of places. That's kind of where they go with it. Yeah.
There's a lot of that, and then there's a lot of kind of quite like sensible money stuff that's like, just understand finances. Here are some numbers and terms and conditions. And I sound like I'm really slagging off all my fellow people in the money blogging and community. I'm not. You people create incredible content and you do wonderful things, but your niche is not my niche. And my niche is the people who are afraid, who are ashamed, who are uncertain, confused, and who feel like they're possessed by a squanderlust demon, feel like something in themselves is causing them to fail at money, where, maybe other parts of their lives go great, right? They're competent and professional, and or not professional, like they are incredible friends, incredible family members. They have at least one area of competence, in their rest of their lives, but money is kind of the thing that they're not good at, and that is upsetting and difficult for them. Because back then I was working with a co-host, when we chose that name, it was really about kind of understanding that there is this part of yourself, or there can be this part of yourself that feels very out of control around money. And we wanted to convey that and then say, like, look, that is really normal.
And we'll come on to normal too. There's a whole different subject. But do you know what? You're quite right. I think, like you said, I mean, you needn't, but that kind of apology, I think it's about the tribe that you've built, and the tribe that you've built will be very different to anybody else's. It's the same with me in the mental health space, that there are going to be people that are more maybe traditional solution focused, and that's great because, as you say, everyone has their place in the food chain and stuff. But we need to get good with that. I think we need to get good with the fact that, look, not everyone's going to really buy into us, and what works coming from your lips may not work from coming from somebody else's lips, and vice versa. But the people that really get you will really get you, because the one thing you're very, very good at is showing vulnerability and authenticity in what has to be said is one of the last bastions of traditional business in its truest sense. So you will have those extremes within that, people that are really rebelling against the system kind of thing. And you kind of, I think for me, you kind of, as an outsider looking into your industry, you bridge that gap between the two. And I think that's a really kind of powerful place to be, because people need to be handheld sometimes through big periods of change.
Yeah, I hope so. That's really lovely to hear. Yeah,
so I've had a sneak preview of your upcoming talk. I mean, by the time this actually goes out, we're recording this as it stands in May. I think it's May. My head's a bit frazzled today. Last week, Mental Health Awareness Week, 28 engagements in 5 days. I'm entitled to be frazzled today. It's fine.
Oh, yeah. You're entitled to be horizontal.
Well, that was the other option. But I don't want to let you down or let me down. Anyway, but when this goes out, you will have delivered this talk. Now you're speaking and sharing a virtual stage alongside people like Ruby Wax, talking about that kind of what it means to be normal, or who wants to be normal, as you've asked your audience.
Yeah.
What does that mean?
Yeah.
What does that look like? Tell our audience about it, because actually in the mental health arena, normal is one of those terms that just seems, it's very subjective anyway, but it seems kind of unattainable because we put a different value on normal. What does that look like for you? Yeah.
So, I mean, you've just summarized some of the early points of my talk there, that normal is incredibly subjective, where and I think a lot of this is about media consensus, right? There's a sort of a version of normal that's portrayed to us as being it's not even aspirational, actually. It's the person you sort of should be, but it's not even necessarily aspirational. It's just a kind of, this is normal. This box is normal. You're either within it or without it. If you're within it, you belong. And if you're outside, you should be attempting to be inside because your status in our society is at risk.
So it's very much a societal kind of framework that you either are something or not something. It takes away that period of grey, maybe, between the black and white.
Yeah, I think so. That's sort of how I see it. I see normal as being a kind of like having the outward markers of fitting into your group. Yeah. But then, so that's the sort of societal level. I think there are lots of layers of normal, right? So I think you have your normal for just you, by yourself in your home when nobody can see you. You have what you normally do, and you get to create that normal completely, right? That's the bit that's completely in your control. That's just yours. And then you have normal for your household, which is like, how do you and the people you live with, assuming you do live with other people, how do you navigate your day-to-day lives together? What do you see as normal? And that will involve some compromise, right? You have to create a normal together. Yeah. And that'll be based on your perceptions between you. And then you'll have kind of your immediate community. What do they perceive as normal? And there'll be, again, some compromise between what you want to do and as an individual, and then what helps you to fit into that community. And there can be some tension there again, and you have to work that out about how much do I want to put effort into seeming normal within this community in order to fit in versus how much do I want to just express myself and just express my preferences, my tastes, my my creativity, my needs and wants. Even quite sort of basic seeming needs and wants can sometimes go against a normal. Yeah. And
that applies personally and professionally as well, then, doesn't it? Because
totally,
it's kind of culture led. It can actually potentially be a limiting belief that, or a
Sure.
certainly a conditioning element where to achieve normal. But that's an interesting, as regular kind of subscribers to the show know, that I go off down rabbit holes, and I'm really, really worried about this one, because I know that we go off down rabbit holes left, right, and centre when we're not being recorded. Let alone when we are being recorded. So I'm trying to be as focused as possible. However, that definition of normal, and thank you so much for kind of delivering that with so much clarity. That means that people that try to rebel against the norm or kind of aspire to the norm, they're actually not aspiring to a fixed point, are they?
No.
So it becomes like a spun version of the truth all the way through.
Yeah, totally. And one of the interesting things is you'll have different norms in different social environments, right? What's normal for you at work will be different from what's normal from you at home, versus if you're a member of a club or society, or you play sports in a team or something, there'll be what's normal in that group, right? The more similar the people are in your different normal groups, the more overlap there is, and the smaller they are, the more consistent you can be in those different environments and still always fit in. So you'll find people who are who will say, and they mean it, I'm the same everywhere I go, I don't change. And quite often, sometimes it's because they're just incredibly secure and they just take me or leave me and I am who I am. Right. And they don't adapt, and that's, kudos to those people. But also you will often find that the people who say I'm exactly the same whoever I'm with, there's a lot of overlap, a lot of cultural overlap, and a lot of just literally the exact same people being in the groups all the time, between all the different environments they're in. So they don't have to adapt or change, because the norms are very similar, because the people are very similar in all the different groups they're in. If you go to somewhere, if you have somebody who's in a much bigger social circle, or who works in quite a different environment from where they live, and then, maybe is a member of some other community in their social life that's again quite different, those people will adapt a lot more. And they'll change a lot more, and they'll relate a lot more to this idea of there being different kinds of normal and different groups to be in, and how people can be flexible.
So the power of normal then is the meaning that we attribute to it, I guess.
A lot of the time, some of it is, there's also a literal material benefit a lot of the time to being or seeming normal. And I think it's really, really important that we acknowledge that. Coming back to my financial education hat here, let's put that on. Being accepted by the group you're in has material benefits, right?
That's quite primal as well, isn't it?
Right. So your tribe, who are your tribe, right? And we, again, in our kind of slightly atomized nuclear family, living miles and miles away from your people kind of lives that we have now, we're maybe less aware of that sometimes, but there are material benefits to belonging. Who will put you up for the night if your house burns down, right? Who will put you up for the night? Who would drive you to the hospital to see a relative if you didn't have another way of transporting yourself? Who will lend you literally anything from a cup of sugar to a book to their, a vehicle to a place to stay? That stuff is it's very tribal, right? And it's about fitting in. So there is a real material benefit to being seen to belong, right? And that can be about seeming normal, or it can be about having connection with people. And you don't necessarily always have to seem completely normal to build connection, but you have to connect more one-on-one with people if you're not going to meet norms, right?
I get that. So I guess over the past 14 months, then, as it stands right here today, over this kind of period of pandemic and lockdown, I think one of the phrases alongside unprecedented and furlough, which are just words that didn't really exist in my vocabulary before, was this kind of new normal. So I guess if normal's a subjective term anyway, the new normal is kind of like a paradox. But
Yeah.
How has kind of normal looked for you personally over the past kind of 14 months? How has life changed for you?
I'm one of these people who's been working a lot more rather than less. So while some people have been on furlough or have lost work, in the sphere of people, people found their financial situations changed. And when your financial situation changes, you turn to others for information about what do you do and for advice about that. And so trying to I have freelance clients that don't necessarily show up on my social media with regards to the podcast and my blog and things like that. So I've been doing a lot of work in the background with freelance clients around kind of creating content for them, creating learning materials for them to help people to navigate their financial situation as it changes. And so that's been, I think I've just been holed up in the room that I'm in right now. My husband says, I'm just always in here and I'm not out in the world. So this has been my sort of my space really. It's become very limited. But I've just been kind of at my computer furiously typing and researching for months on end. It's been very challenging, but less challenging than for a lot of other people, I think. I'm lucky and I'm very, very grateful for it. I'm extremely grateful for it.
Yeah, I absolutely get that. I think certainly there's an element of that perspective element, well, who am I to feel this way when other people got so much else going on over the past kind of 14 months that I've delivered now 5 talks to the NHS and then on the absolute flip side to local residential homes and everywhere in between. Yeah. One thing I found is actually that essentially if something is causing you pain or frustration, and you've got absolutely right to own that and to help yourself. Totally. And thank you so much for sharing that, because everyone had, I mean, like I said, I'm very much open about this kind of corona coaster, as I've heard it called, that over the past year, literally, I've been at my lowest for a long time. And on the flip side, there's been a lot of good things to come from this as well. Yeah. So it's not all bad in that sense, but thank you for sharing that.
Yeah.
I also think, and talking about normal again, that that kind of stay home, save lives thing that had to be put in place to safeguard us will and has formed this conditioning belief for a lot of people that inside is safe and outside isn't safe.
Yeah.
So as we step out into the light of the brave new world, and hopefully by the time this goes out in July, we're going to be a lot more au fait, that will be in a good place.
Yeah.
Then we may be along the way of kind of addressing that. But that does have an impact, doesn't it?
Oh, and massively, yeah.
Certainly with finances, financial well-being and mental health, that kind of stuff, that money and mental health is huge. So if people have had financial experiences that have not been great over the past 14 months, that will affect the decisions they make here on in, wouldn't it?
Absolutely. And I think one of the things that's a real challenge when you suddenly have to cut right back on your spending, and if you suddenly have to, if you go from being kind of relatively mindless about your spending because you've always got enough to, really having to watch every penny and being very concerned about that, the temptation can be to be over frugal to the point of never allowing yourself or your household any kind of treats or nice things at all. And I'm not saying be frivolous because you're going to assume the good times will be back someday, because that again is also really risky. But don't ever make a spending plan or a budget that is so tight that there's no fun in there at all, because you cannot stick to that and you will get a kind of purge and splurge, as I call it, sort of shuttling.
I can see that on a t-shirt for some reason. Or like a stress ball that he's giving away at conferences and things. I like that. No, it's pretty cool.
Merchandising tips from Nick Elston.
Yeah, merch, all about the merch.
Yeah.
So, and the one thing I did want to touch on, if it's okay with you, because I've had the pleasure of hearing kind of like your backstory. You've had so many kind of fascinating experiences, and I guess starting with the parents that we mentioned right at the beginning. So tell us about kind of little Martha Lawton, where you came
Oh.
from, and also how far it took you afield, because you lived and worked in Japan for quite a while as well, didn't you?
Yeah. So little Martha, let's see how much little Martha matches up with grown up Martha now. Okay, so little Martha was very shy, very quiet, incredibly nerdy, basically. By the time I would say I was sort of into my mid-teens, I was really a very awkward, very nervous, very nerdy child. And a lot of that came about because of where I grew up, where I did not fit normal very well. So I grew up in a tiny, tiny little village in rural Oxfordshire. There were 60 children in my primary school, in 2 classes. And my parents were from London, and they were both yoga teachers. And back then in the 1980s, yoga was not what it is today, right? Yoga nowadays is kind of what mummies do to stay yummy. Yoga in the 1980s was like weird, heathen, ungodly practice. People who do yoga probably into hallucinogens and free love and that kind of thing. And my parents were into growing their own vegetables and DIY and home baking and things, like really, really the most wholesome people. They were much more the like lentils and crafts end of the yoga spectrum, rather than the sex cult end of the yoga spectrum.
I love that spectrum. I may use that for other things in life and in business, the sex cult spectrum.
So, but you know, our neighbours were a bit suspicious, I think, of them and of us, and some of that rubbed off on me. And my parents did have some different kind of beliefs about how they wanted us raised, my sister and I, and those didn't necessarily fit in with our village and with our village school, which was a Church of England primary school. And we had at least one really quite religious teacher who, again, was probably a bit suspicious of my folks, because, you know, yoga, Hindu, Buddhism, etc. And it was difficult. You know, kids can be really cruel. And
absolutely,
when you are the weird kid out of 60 kids, you're the weird kid, right? You're not a weird kid, you're the weird kid. I was very, very alone for a lot of my childhood. And unfortunately, even when I got into secondary school and there were 800 children from across multiple villages, you know, some of it stuck, I would say. And I habitually still expected people to treat me the way I'd been treated previously. And so I was very defensive and very shy and awkward. But also, you know, the same children were there in my cohort and would say things to other children about me that weren't necessarily true. And so it was very difficult for me to find a place. You know, I did find other geeky, weird kids who'd been the weird kid in their village to hang out with. But ultimately, you know, it was really tough. It was honestly really tough. And it wore me down a lot. And I had very, very low self-esteem. I was very depressed a lot. And it was only when I was 16, just before I was 16, the summer before my GCSE year, that for reasons we won't go into, it was my parents were there was some stuff. My parents were married. It was not a marital problem with my parents, but there was some stuff at home. And it was my parents decided that the easiest way to cope was for them to be together and focus on supporting each other. And for my sister and I to go for a week to these summer holidays sort of activity camp places.
Okay.
And so we each chose one of these camps, and we went to different ones, and I went and hung out for a week with a bunch of people from all over the country that I'd never met before. And suddenly that reputation that had been with me since I was 8 years old was evaporated. Like it just wasn't there. I was able to make a completely fresh start with these people. And I came in very determined that I was going to have as good time as possible, and I was going to be friendly and like try and enjoy this summer camp because there was lots of cool stuff to do and I was quite excited to do it. And suddenly I was having a great time making friends.
Wow,
and
amazing.
I realized that all of these beliefs that I'd held about myself as being this unlikable, unattractive, like just undesirable person, was just nonsense. It was context, and it was other people's viewpoints that were kind of a combination of being very outdated, but also just probably fundamentally flawed in the first place. And that if I went to somewhere new with new people, I could recreate myself or express myself in a new way that I never had done. And that the person I could be in this new context could have friends. I even met my first boyfriend on that summer camp, had my first kiss. It was a whole different thing. And that gave me the confidence to change schools for sixth form. So I did my GCSE year at the same old school, but I now had this kind of thing to sustain me through my GCSE year. And when I got out of GCSEs, I changed schools for sixth form and just reinvented myself. And I kind of exploded, right? After all these years of acting closed in and introverted and defensive all of this time, I just kind of went, hey, I'm going to have all the opinions. I'm going to wear the brightest, most loud clothes you've ever seen. Take me or leave me. I think
the Big Bang. That's how it looks like.
Yeah,
boom. Some of you were there. Yeah.
Completely. And I can't say that always worked for me. But I mean, if you're going to do that,
we've all been there.
If you're going to do that, 17, 18 is a great year to do that, right?
Exactly.
Yeah, you get a free pass on a lot of nonsense when you're that age. So I just kind of exploded. And I did have friends and I did have a good time and I got my A-levels and that was good. And then I went to university and it kind of continued, but without parental supervision. So suddenly there was alcohol involved. And I was trying to manage my own money and not particularly successfully at that. And so I sort of expanded, I think, over the following years. And I've skipped out my first trip to Japan, but that was also an incredibly formative, I guess, experience. And I think the confidence to go out in the world and go to Japan came in part from that sort of initial experience, that real pivoting point, I guess, in my life of going to this camp when I was 15.
So what first took you to Japan? Was it literally the furthest place you could find away from where you were at the time? Was it?
You know what? My sister has joked that. She was like, I think often about the fact that you left home by going to the other side of the globe.
Yeah. Not going to Wales for a week or nothing wrong with Wales, by the way, for my Welsh audience, but
Yeah, no, I mean, Wales is
beautiful
lovely.
Place. However, Japan is a lot further away.
So why Japan? So I really wanted to do a gap year project and travel.
Okay.
I saw that as an opportunity that again would probably never come again, an opportunity to do something really exciting and different in my life. And I applied to this organization called Gap Activities Projects. And they sent me this booklet with all the different countries that you could apply to go to. And they said, pick 5. And so I picked Vietnam, South Africa, Romania, and Hungary, maybe somewhere else in Eastern Europe, definitely. And then I needed a 5th country. And
so you picked up a dart, threw it at Globe.
Well, so at that point, Japan was not really a tourist destination at all. And my impression of Japan was that it was this place that you only went to if you went there on business or if you were studying Japan and Japanese specifically. Yeah. And so I thought, I may never have another opportunity to go to Japan. Japan might be this country that I never go to unless I put it on my list here. And so it hadn't been on my kind of initial radar at all. But it just kind of, I just thought, you know what, this might be my one chance to go to Japan, and let's put it in there. And then somebody told me, I don't even know where on the grapevine I heard this, that it was really hard to get onto the Japan project and they were very competitive. And so I thought, oh, I'd better put it as my first choice then, and otherwise I won't. Now, my first real choice was probably Vietnam or South Africa. So why was I putting Japan down? My bottom
sliding doors moments, love them.
You know, like my 18-year-old brain was not really computing this particularly effectively. And so
probably the alcohol.
Well, I wasn't drinking that. This is when I was still living at home. Yeah. I put it down, and I put it down as my first choice. And what I thought was going to happen, what I thought the charity did, was that they'd bring me in for a general kind of suitability interview. Could I manage living overseas for 6 months? And then they would match me with a country. That's what I sort of thought was going to happen. What actually happened was I was interviewed for Japan. And then if I'd been suitable for going overseas, but not Japan, they would have looked at my other countries and said, where would you fit? What they actually did was to say, great, you're going to Japan. And I went, oh, wait, but okay. And suddenly I found myself in way outer suburban southern Osaka, wow. Which is like, it's fascinating because it's neither, it's not the Japan that you see on the telly, right? It's the Japan that the vast majority of Japanese people live in, right? Is these sort of little suburban, I guess, former towns or villages that are now just part of these giant cities like Osaka and Tokyo. And, you know, they sprawl, and they have just miles and miles and miles of these little houses and little blocks of apartments, with kind of rice fields in between, and often quite a strong local town identity that's lasted traditionally through this sort of join up. But it's just suburbia, right? And that's what I got there. I got there, and we were talking about what feels normal, right? Everybody was saying to me, you'll go to Japan, it'll be so different, it'll be so strange, how are you going to cope? And I got there and cool, it's suburbia, right? It's
wherever it is on the planet, suburbia is suburbia.
It's suburbia. It's car dealerships and shopping malls and doctor surgeries, and it's just because they have all the electric wires up on poles rather than buried in the earth because of earthquakes, there are still electric wires. There may be different things celebrated, but there are still celebrations. It's
amazing. I know from previous conversations that you mentioned that one of the biggest differences was actually in that kind of connection between people, like actually being part of a community or as an outsider coming into that, and how that looked. Tell us about that.
Yeah. So I think, Japan has a very strong group identity, and your group identity and group identities and your places in the group are very explicit in Japan in a way that I think in the UK we keep things quite fuzzy. We don't really like the idea of in-group and out-group. being very defined because we see that as elitist or cliquey or exclusionary. But those groups still exist here. They're not, they're not so non-existent, right? But because they are quite existent in Japan and they're quite explicit, there are often ways you can join. Like, this is how you join, and this is your kind of progression within the group. So you see that, but also, I was an outsider. Literally, the word for foreigner is outside person.
And I was, to be fair,
it couldn't be more clear, right? Yeah, yes. yeah. And so I was a gaijin. I was an outside person, and I was the white foreigner in my town, the only one I knew of for many miles around me. Stood out like a sore thumb, and it became really clear to me that I was exciting and exotic to the people around me. I was sort of an interesting, almost like a novelty, I guess. Wow.
So in actually, people's it's kind lives. Of like a paradox. It's flipped on its side from you growing up being the only person, and that's a negative. Actually, suddenly you were the only person. And that's brilliant. It's the real positive. Yeah, it was like, I like that. Being like a minor celebrity or something. People would come up to me in the street. Wow. They would want photographs potentially. I had amazing invitations. Somebody, please come to my house and teach my daughter English. Please, let's go on a trip somewhere, because I wasn't just a foreigner there. I was a guest. Yeah. And Japan has an incredible hospitality culture. I always remember delivering a talk at the University of Lincoln, and some Japanese students were there. And again, that same thing, that they hadn't seen or heard anybody speaking openly about mental illness and mental health. So they kind of had their pictures taken with me. I kind of still maintain to this day they thought I was a fat Tony Robbins. But that's kind of what I'm going with. But how long were you there for in the end? How long did you stay in Japan for? And then did you manage to kind of forge relationships and friendships and stuff? Oh, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, this is the thing that really came through was for all that sort of perception of, outside person and versus Japanese person or whatever. People are people. And that really came to me. And that's been really fundamental to how I see the world. People are people. I worked somewhere. I was set up with a work placement when I got to Japan. And I was working actually in a residential home for disabled elderly people who didn't have family who could look after them. So that was what I was doing day to day. It was kind of care work. I still have the bad back to prove it. But I got to know the other staff. I got to know the residents. I built friendships. I got to know people's kids. I got to hear people's kind of gripes, and they were exactly the same gripes that you always hear. Why is my place on the rota always the worst possible time? What about language? Did you go over being able to speak some Japanese, or did you go? I went over there with about 10 words, and we were set up with a local woman who'd lived in America for a while, who would come in once a month and translate to make sure that if there was any kind of serious issues, that those wouldn't be left for too long, and we could contact her if we had her number if we really needed her in the intervening time. And we also had a Japanese organization that we were in contact with that was sort of the outpost of the Gap Activities projects who'd set this whole thing up. So there was structure. And I say we, because I was actually originally sent over there with another English girl, and she couldn't handle it. Wow. She couldn't handle a lot of things about it. She had a very close-knit group of friends back home. She'd had a boyfriend back home. She was also taller, curvier, and had a mass of beautiful red hair. And so she physically stood out more than I did. And when we were, in public together, she got all of the attention as the foreigner. And I sort of initially was less
visible, I guess. And she found that combination of, it's very different. I'm getting all this attention and people are staring at me. I'm away from my home. I'm away from my family. She was also younger than me. And you talked about, like, did you choose to go to the other side of the earth because it wasn't where you were living? You know, kind of, yeah, a little bit. She went to the other side of the earth and realized how much she loved home.
Wow.
And she booked a flight home after a couple of weeks and went back.
I think it's further proof of how subjective normal is, because to you, it was actually not too far a stretch from where you were before, your kind of thoughts and stuff. And to her, it was
impossible.
On a different planet.
Yeah.
Crazy.
Yeah.
See, I know I could talk to you for ages, but it's going to be a really long episode if we do. And the amount of rabbit holes we go down. So bringing it back to some order, what's next for Martha Lawton? What's on the agenda?
What is next?
Apart from a house move. That's a whole thing.
Don't even talk about it. Don't even talk about it. By the time the episode airs, I will either have moved or not moved, and I don't know yet which it's going to be. So
wow. It's kind of like Schrodinger's cat thing going on until July.
yeah. Like, please, I will have moved, but it might not have
Everything's
happened. Who
crossed
knows?
for you.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
So what else? What's in the future? What's your plans? What's your ambitions?
So what are my plans and ambitions? I would love to keep talking about what's normal with people. I promise to be less rambly and rabbit hole-ish in a...
Genuinely, not at all. This has been one of the most powerful and impactful podcast episodes we've had. Your openness and your ability to really convey that emotion really shines through. So absolutely no apology needed. Don't make me tell you off. No apologies needed ever.
Bless you.
Yeah.
And then
so doing more of that, reaching more audiences.
Yeah, that would be great. I have my podcast, which comes out every other week. We have
Links in the bio.
Awesome guests talking about the psychology of money. Why is it that you don't do the things you intend to do with your finances, and what can you do about it? More to the point, we do actually give you the advice to get around your emotional, psychological quirks wherever we can. I'm developing a whole bunch of kind of stuff around the coaching and learning side, but all of that is still very much in development. So kind of watch this space. Exciting. And I have a blog, which is marthalawton.com. You can go over there and there's more stuff. So if you prefer to read as opposed to listening, or if you like both, get on there. There is lots of my stuff on the internet.
Absolutely. All the links to Martha's stuff is, as we put, is in the bio. So please do check her out. Please do connect. I'm sure she'll be happy to hear from you with any questions that you have.
Please.
I'm delighted to have brought Martha to you, my audience. Really excited to have her on the show today. And now you know absolutely why I was so excited. The question I ask everybody that comes on the show is this. I am now the MC of the O2 Arena. 20,000 people have paid on hard-earned money to come and hear you do your thing, to deliver your talk.
Yeah.
I'm just about to introduce you to the stage, and your walk-on music kicks in. That one track that motivates you, that lifts you, that gets your energy up. What would that walk-on music track be?
It would be 6 Shooter by Coyote Kisses, which is an absolute banger. It
really is.
It's great. It's a combination of it's a dance track. It's an electronic track, but it's got this big kind of indie rock vibe, big guitars, big bass line. And yeah, I love it. It's an amazing song.
That actually is on my own personal playlist.
Amazing.
I enjoyed when you first mentioned that to me a few months ago. I really love that track.
Yeah.
So that track, along with every other track from our guests and our speakers, it's going to be on the playlist at the end of season 2. So please stay tuned. It's going to be a banging playlist. Maybe I could do a new, remember like a Now albums, like a double vinyl or something, and I get a double vinyl release of all this stuff. But for now, big thank you, Martha Lawton.
Thank you.
An amazing guest, and I'm sure we'll have you back for season 3 if you would give your time to us. That'd be fantastic.
Always
amazing. So for everybody else, please stay tuned. On episode 15, we have the amazing Carl Reeder, somebody I've spoken alongside, shared a stage with, author, speaker, influencer. So stay tuned for that one. That's coming next Wednesday. But for now, that's me. Stay happy, stay well, and I will see you soon. Take care, guys. Cheers. Bye-bye. Bye.
And that's a wrap.
A big thank you for tuning in to today's show. Please stay tuned and hit subscribe for future episodes, bringing you amazing guests sharing amazing content and amazing insights. Really excited to bring you these. The Forge Ahead show is sponsored by nickelston.com. If you want to connect with me, you can find all the ways possible through the website. If you want to drop me a message, always great to hear from you. But in the meantime, if I don't catch you before, I'll see you at the next episode. And you take care, guys. Cheers now. Bye. Bye-bye.